Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second one of the day, I do want to remind you yet again, if you do feel so inclined, you guys have been doing an excellent job so far of this. Keep on making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, Super Stickers features on YouTube. They're a great way to interact with the show. Get your comments on air. I'm loving the interaction we've been getting. Shout out to Andre, as always, one of my favorite commenters throughout the weeks and shows. As Andre says, should I trade Kelce for McBride? Interesting one, because at the start of the year I probably would have said no, but now both of these guys really haven't shown me much from the position. Owner said he'll give me Dell and McBride for, I believe he's trying to say, for either Montgomery or Kelce. So when I look at this trade, I'm thinking about, the tight end market and how I've said we view this. And I feel like there's potential for Travis Kelce to still pick up the pieces in this Chiefs offense. But he has looked a bit labored these first couple of games, whereas I like McBride in this Arizona Cardinals offense, as Andre confirms that he is willing to trade for Montgomery. If it's Dell and McBride for Montgomery, I think that that's a better trade. But as Andre also says, he's on his bench. I think that Montgomery, though, has had an impressive start to the season. I'm not sure how long that will continue to go, because I do think the Lions will get back to utilizing more pieces. They still have Amon-Ra. Has a couple of decent games. The guy's Brandon Aubrey. I kind of want to ask for him instead of Dell. Well, Brandon Aubrey might be one of the best kickers in the league, and he might be worth a lot more points right now than actually some skill position players. So, whatever you want to do, a lot of interesting pieces in this trade. Running backs, tight ends, both of them volatile markets. So, in this trade, I think that you can do whatever you want. If you feel like Montgomery is going to decline and you want to get rid of him as soon as possible, then you can't offload him. But you have to think as well, are you getting high upside, or are you just getting the same thing? Because Tank Dell and Trey McBride, they can be valuable pieces in their respective offenses, but they haven't really proved it just yet, and I want to see more out of them. But that's a fascinating trade offer, because it really goes to show how volatile and how on point you have to be in deciding who to pick for your fantasy football team week in, week out. But also, speaking of this, let's take a look at the waiver wire, because maybe someone's answers will be answered through there as well. And there's still a lot of guys out there who I really think add certain value for your team. And let's start off with a skeptical pick I kind of warned you about, the controversial pick that I kind of warned you about, at the quarterback position. Now, for the past couple of weeks, what have I been saying? As Andre also says, I got offered Gibbs for Jordan Mason and Calvin Ridley, but IDK, I feel like Mason's untradeable right now, and I agree with that sentiment. I love Gibbs, but actually, if you want my humble opinion about the Lions offense, I think Montgomery has been the better back, flat out. And I think that, as Andre, how does Iosivas keep catching these touchdowns? I told you, man. I love Andre Iosivas as a wide receiver 3 in Cincinnati. I hope, if that whole contract thing still is a point of tension, that Andre Iosivas gets an opportunity. He made some incredible catches. Yes, he made some rookie mistakes, but he made some incredible catches, has good body control, runs good short to intermediate routes, so he's going to be someone who I'm looking at maybe for next year, or maybe in a dynasty league even, for a fantasy football team in the future. But let's talk about this controversial pick, because I really want to get your guys' opinion on this, because I talked about all the quarterbacks you could find on the waiver wire, the value they could add. The Darnolds, the Geno Smiths, the Baker Mayfields of the world. Kirk Cousins, even in my league, is still out there. But the guy who I want to make my little elevator pitch about, how about Gardner Minshew? Yes, this is a guy who just lost to a Panthers team that seemed directionless, but hear me out. As I was kind of watching, Sunday NFL Countdown leading up to the game, I was thinking, okay, the Panthers-Raiders game is going to kind of be a weird game, but I think the Raiders should be able to pull it out. Pretty impressive win against Baltimore last week. But the more and more I thought about it, with the whole Bryce Young benching thing and Andy Dalton coming in, I thought maybe this could be a potential trap game for a Las Vegas Raiders team that really doesn't have much of an identity, and it was. And not for nothing, Andy Dalton, in the recent past, when he's had like these little spot starts, has performed well in that Panthers offense. So I really think this was more about the Panthers being a little bit more rejuvenated than the Raiders, being kind of punched in the mouth, because I really thought more and more heading into this game that, Andy Dalton might be capable of pulling off this upset here, and the Panthers could win this game outright. So this was more about Andy Dalton than Gardner Minshew. But Gardner Minshew, here's the reason why I like him, his upside. This is the definition, if you look in the dictionary, of a matchups-oriented kind of quarterback. And this is a guy who's going up against a Browns defense this week that just lost Myles Garrett, perhaps the heartbeat of that entire defense. Their offense is an absolute mess, a dumpster fire, if you will. And this Raiders team, yes, they're kind of an unknown entity right now, because a lot of people might say that win over the Ravens was more about the Ravens letting that game slip than the Raiders ultimately winning it. But Gardner Minshew just shows a lot of moxie wherever he goes, and he's always good for one or two spot starts or in deeper leagues as your QB2. So Gardner Minshew, if the Smiths and the Mayfields and the Cousins of the world are off the waiver wire in coming weeks, as I expect they will be, Gardner Minshew might sweep in, find a favorable matchup, and stream him occasionally. So Gardner Minshew is my quarterback of this week, even though he had kind of a down week in a trap game this week. In terms of running backs, there are a lot of different ways you can go. We mentioned Bucky Irving on the show, perhaps the most popular one right now. Maybe even Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. We haven't seen much of him, but he could be someone to look at in the future. But I want to turn your attention to Braylon Allen. This guy has really been impressive. 11 carries, 55 yards, 9.8 points against New England. Kind of down from what we saw out of him in that second game against, I believe it was, I'm forgetting who the Jets played in their second game. The Titans. That's right. Kind of a down game from what we saw of him from the Titans game. But I do like the duality of both of these backs. And not for nothing, I read an interesting stat where it said that Allen averages more yards after contact right now than Breece Hall. I'm not saying or indicting Breece Hall in that, he's having a worse season than we thought. It's just that the utilization of both of them could be very effective for the Jets offense. It has a couple of kinks to work out, as Breece owners have to handcuff Allen, says Andre. I think that, it's not a moment of panic if you're a Breece Hall owner, because this Jets offense has a lot of talent to it and a lot of mouths to feed. And from what we saw of them in the Patriots game, there are so many different talents in this roster. You have Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Tyler Conklin, who I'm going to mention a little bit in terms of tight ends you can find on the waiver wire. But right now, this team just has a lot of questions that I still want answered, and how they're going to handle all of these weapons in the future, because it was a nice win against New England, but it is New England. I have to see more of this in certain situations where they're not the far superior team. So Braylon Allen, though, is someone who I really like, especially as a red zone threat, especially as someone who can alleviate the load of a Breece Hall, kind of balance out the touches in this team. So look for Braylon Allen to be a nice little pickup for you in the future. But again, in terms of tight ends, another Jet, Tyler Conklin. Really impressive game from him against New England. 14.3 fantasy points, 5 catches for 93 yards. And what I love about him is when Aaron Rodgers was forced to work out of structure, he adjusted his routes the best out of any Jet skill position player, in my opinion, to get open for his quarterback. So Tyler Conklin might not be the most appealing tight end. And I know that a lot of people will be jumping on TJ Hawkinson with urgency as soon as he's off the PUP list and want to pick him up. But you can be smart and make the better move here in terms of getting a guy who's proving to be someone who can grow and mature in this Jets offense and be kind of a sneaky asset for them down the road. As much as I love TJ Hawkinson, someone might have already even picked him. So if you really want a high reward kind of guy, then it's Tyler Conklin as your tight end position. But another wide receiver who I want to mention who may be picked up already in certain leagues out there, Malik Nabers. I think that a lot of people were a little bit on the fence about him because they liked him as one of the better rookie wide receivers in this class, but they didn't know how the Giants' offense would look like. Well, it's safe to say that when Daniel Jones gets him the ball, he is perhaps the best wide receiver he's ever had in his time as a Giant. 8 catches, 78 yards against the Browns. So he's kind of one of those players who, throughout certain weeks, fantasy managers might get a bit more tentative about and a bit more loose with, because I'm still not high on the Giants' offense, even though they have a good win under their belt right now. So it's going to be a week in, week out thing. But what can I say? He's either going to be on your league's waiver wire or he's already picked up, because he's kind of one of those weird players who you don't really know how to handle right now. But, like I said, maybe in, say, the future, someone will be like, okay, the Giants' offense is a dud, and then you might be able to pick him up. And who knows, if they're out of playoff positioning and they're not fighting for a playoff spot, Malik Nabers can have big games and shock some people down the road. But for now, he's an interesting commodity that I just wanted to throw out there. But the guy who I think will still be on the waiver wire, two guys really, Tutu Atwell, and to a lesser degree, Jordan Whittington, because the Rams had a very impressive victory, very Kyren Williams oriented and predicated throughout that game. There's a reason that he got them in. But for the time being, the Rams wide receiver room could be a gold mine, but it could also be a detriment to your team as well, because they're still trying to figure out who is going to lead them in the time that Kupp and Puka Nacua will miss. So Tutu Atwell, though, had a pretty impressive game. 93 yards, 13.3 fantasy points. I would still utilize him on my bench. And the reason I threw Jordan Whittington out there is perhaps he's the best route runner out of all of them. He's probably not going to get many targets in this system because he's still kind of, even without Kupp and Nacua, the wide receiver 2 to 3 on the Rams roster, but he's still someone who I value highly as a route runner. As Matthew Albritton enters the chat with an interesting one that will probably take us to break. Traded CMC for Brian Robinson Jr. and Brandon Ayuk last night. I already have Jordan Mason. W thoughts? I think that's a very valuable pickup because we don't know how long CMC will be, right? So you're right to have qualms about him and want to trade him away. Brian Robinson Jr. and Brandon Ayuk. That's a very interesting investment as well, because Brian Robinson Jr. last night had a couple impressive carries, but as we saw, the offense didn't look the same. The Eckler, which is kind of surprising to me because I thought Brian Robinson Jr. was going to get more touches as the season progressed in this offense, and it could project to be that way still. So he's an interesting pickup. That being said, I will be wary of how he's utilized in the run game. And Brandon Ayuk, the interesting thing about him is he's one of those valuable assets where he's either going to help someone else, like he did in this game against the Rams, have a big fantasy performance, or he himself is going to have a big fantasy performance. There's no other way around it. Because what we saw from him this week was that, okay, I know that we're down to just me and my guy Jawan Jennings, so I'm going to be kind of like decoy, let Jawan Jennings have a big game. So in the future, as long as all of their other weapons are out, it's going to be interesting to see how both him and Jennings kind of play out. So it's an interesting pickup, but you're right in worrying about CMC and wanting to trade him away. And because you have Mason, it's an interesting stack if both him and Ayuk have good nights. So overall, I think this is a very good trade. I think that we'll see if the investment in Brian Robinson Jr. is a good one, but I think that you got a good return for CMC. So that being said, though, we will have to take a quick break, and when we see you on the other side, I give you some of my bold fantasy predictions. So don't be surprised, if you will, for this upcoming week. Thank you all for the comments for this past segment, but we'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports